Welcome to DigiSET Talks, the podcast of the DigiSET Project, a European teacher academy supporting teachers in the digital and sustainability transition. This is episode 1, No Teacher Learns Alone. Today's episode is curated by the University of Siena, with a scientific contribution from Mario Giampaolo, associate professor at the University of Siena.
That introduction sets us up for something so many educators know too well. Picture this highly recognizable scene. You have just finished teaching a particularly demanding lesson, and you close your classroom door. The corridor is entirely quiet.
And you are left completely alone with what just happened in that room. You are facing the unexpected successes, the moments where a core concept fell completely flat, and the confusion of trying to understand why a specific activity failed.
You are standing there with absolutely no one to compare notes with. Which raises our central question for today. How did teaching become such an isolated act in the first place? And what actually happens when we finally open that classroom door to our colleagues?
To understand that isolation, we have to look at the traditional top-down model of professional development. For decades now, the default mechanism for improving education has been the external seminar or isolated training day.
You are pulled out of your school, sent to a different venue entirely, and expected to passively absorb new pedagogical theories from a visiting instructor.
Which poses an obvious problem. Why does that intensive Friday training day so rarely change what you actually do with your students on a Monday morning? The research highlights a severe lack of continuous, situated support.
Expecting a single event to alter established habits just ignores the complex reality of a school environment. It is like reading a manual about a new high-performance car in a hotel conference room, but never being allowed to practice driving it with an instructor in real traffic.
That analogy perfectly illustrates why episodic seminars fail. You might understand the abstract mechanics of the car perfectly well while sitting in the hotel conference room, but teaching is profoundly context-bound.
Because when you return to your classroom on Monday, you are not dealing with abstract theories. You are facing immediate, practical friction. You have varying student behavior, strict curriculum demands, and the relentless pace of the school timetable.
A theory about classroom management sounds flawless until you are standing in front of 30 teenagers on a rainy Monday afternoon. Without sustained support from peers to help you navigate that real-world traffic, the new theory simply evaporates.
The science of adult learning supports that conclusion. You cannot just download a new strategy into an adult's brain and expect immediate application. Adults learn through a continuous cycle of trial, error, and shared reflection within the exact environment where they work.
It involves trying a technique, failing, and figuring out why it failed with someone who understands your specific context. The assumption that knowledge can be transferred uniformly across all schools completely disregards the social nature of learning.
Education requires constant adaptation. Expecting you to adapt to every new curriculum change or technological shift entirely on your own is an unreasonable burden. The complexity of the modern classroom genuinely demands collective inquiry.
So if those traditional models are failing so predictably, we need to transition to what actually works. When teachers learn well together, what does that actually look like inside a standard school week?
We must be clear that we are not talking about informal socializing. This is not about a casual chat in the staff room over a cup of tea where you might vent about a difficult class or share a quick anecdote.
Effective professional development requires structured collaboration. It involves deliberate, systematic practices built into the fabric of the working week. Consider the practice of lesson study, for instance.
Lesson study is a brilliant method because it moves the focus entirely from the theoretical to the practical. Picture sitting down with 3 of your colleagues to collaboratively plan a single specific lesson. You spend time designing the approach together and anticipating where students might struggle.
Then one of you actually teaches that lesson while the others observe. But they are not observing to evaluate the teacher. They are observing the students. They are watching how the students react to the material, where they get confused, and what questions they ask.
Afterwards, you all sit down and collectively refine the lesson based on that direct observation. Another method involves watching video recordings of your own teaching.
You might record a 10-minute segment of a class and bring it to a trusted group of peers. Subjecting your methods to that kind of objective review allows the group to notice patterns you might entirely miss while you are in the thick of delivering the lesson.
Perhaps you unknowingly direct all your questions to one side of the room, or your instructions were not as clear as you thought. You also collectively examine tangible evidence of student learning, like sitting down with a set of marking.
Looking at marking together completely shifts the dynamic of professional development. You bring the actual student output to the table. You look at where 5 different students made the exact same error in a maths problem, or how they misinterpreted a historical source.
The discussion moves away from what you intended to deliver and focuses entirely on what the students actually absorbed. It grounds the conversation in tangible evidence. We also must consider how digital spaces are expanding this structured practice beyond a single school building.
Virtual platforms allow you to share those video clips or examples of marking asynchronously. This breaks the geographical isolation that has historically limited professional networks.
That digital dimension is transformative, particularly if you are teaching in a rural area or handling a highly specialized subject. If you are the only physics teacher in your school, finding peer feedback locally is nearly impossible.
Digital communities provide a professional solidarity that simply does not exist within your own local walls. You can co-construct knowledge with peers across the continent who face the exact same daily realities.
I am going to push back slightly here, though. If I am a teacher listening to this, I might be thinking this just sounds like a recipe for more meetings in an already packed timetable.
I understand that concern, as teachers are already under immense pressure. But this is where we need to draw a crucial distinction. Genuine learning communities are focused directly on the work itself, not on administrative tasks.
When you gather with colleagues to evaluate a stack of marking or refine a lesson plan based on classroom evidence, you are engaging in the core intellectual work of your profession. You are replacing the redundant solitary planning that consumes your evenings and transforming it into a shared endeavor.
We do have to address the honest difficulty of implementation, however, because none of this happens automatically. If this method is so demonstrably valuable, why do so many attempts to create these communities quietly fail?
We cannot pretend this is a simple administrative tweak. The barriers are severe and deeply entrenched in the structure of traditional schooling. The most immediate obstacle is the chronic shortage of time.
Schools operate on rigid, unforgiving schedules. Finding common periods for you and your colleagues to engage in deep, reflective work is a formidable logistical challenge. On top of that, the administrative weight is often crushing.
When you are overwhelmed with compliance tasks, answering emails and filling out forms, finding the mental bandwidth for critical reflection becomes nearly impossible. Coupled with those logistical barriers is a deeply entrenched, individualistic work culture.
For generations, the classroom has been treated as a private sanctuary. You are accustomed to autonomy behind a closed door, and breaking down those psychological walls takes considerable effort.
Furthermore, weak facilitation can turn a community into a bureaucratic formality. If a collaborative group lacks someone with the specific skills to guide the discussion and keep the focus strictly on student evidence, the process leaves everyone feeling their time has been wasted.
You cannot impose a learning community by decree. It is like trying to grow a delicate plant on solid concrete. A head teacher can mandate attendance at a weekly meeting, but the initiative will not survive without the correct foundational conditions.
It requires the fertile soil of relational trust, distributed leadership, and internal school policies that formally protect your time. Distributed leadership is essential to cultivating that soil.
Head teachers must empower you and your colleagues to take ownership of these communities, shifting authority away from a purely top-down hierarchy. When a school decentralizes leadership, you stop being a mere subject of professional development and become its architect.
The agenda is set by the pedagogical problems you are actively facing, not by an external consultant. Additionally, school policies must formally protect that collaborative time.
If your scheduled peer review hour is constantly hijacked to cover an absent colleague's class, it demonstrates structurally that the institution does not value your intellectual labor. Formal recognition systems also play a significant role.
When participation in a learning community is officially recognized as a core component of career progression, it signals a complete cultural shift. It elevates collaboration from an optional extra to the central mechanism for improving education.
When those structural and cultural barriers are eventually overcome, the results are profound. What changes for the teacher who stops working in isolation?
The transformation extends far beyond simply acquiring a few new instructional techniques. The most significant change is a fundamental shift in agency. You transform from a passive implementer of external curriculum reforms into an active curriculum designer.
You are no longer simply delivering a mandated syllabus created by distant policymakers. You are collectively adapting, questioning, and refining that syllabus based on the specific sociocultural realities of the students sitting in front of you.
This newly acquired agency naturally leads to a renewed professional identity. The research consistently demonstrates a sharp rise in internal motivation among teachers who engage in this level of structured collaboration.
You develop a vital resilience against burnout and institutional fragmentation because you are anchored by a supportive network. You navigate continuous educational reforms not as an isolated individual, but as part of a cohesive professional body.
We do have to confront the emotional cost of this transformation, because exposing your teaching to the constructive gaze of colleagues requires immense vulnerability.
It is genuinely daunting to let a peer see a lesson that completely flops, or to share marking that reveals your students failed to grasp a core concept despite your absolute best efforts.
The fear of being judged as incompetent is a powerful deterrent to opening that door, but that vulnerability is both the price of admission and the entire point of the process. It is the only way genuine growth happens.
When you can openly share a failure and your community responds with collaborative problem-solving rather than judgment, the school culture fundamentally shifts.
The isolation that breeds anxiety and burnout is replaced by a shared commitment to mastering the craft. By embracing that vulnerability, you move the focus away from your individual performance and toward collective effectiveness.
The closed door might feel safer in the short term, but leaving it open is what allows you to thrive, adapt, and sustain your passion for education over the course of a demanding career.
It reframes a struggling lesson entirely. It is no longer a personal reflection of your competence, It is simply a pedagogical problem for the community to solve together.
Synthesizing our discussion brings us to one honest, grounding takeaway. Teaching has never truly been a solitary craft, despite the physical isolation dictated by a traditional classroom architecture.
The work is inherently social, yet the structure of the profession has forced educators to carry the intellectual weight alone. The absolute strongest professional development is not an external course in a distant venue.
It is the steady, continuous company of colleagues who look at the work together. By demanding and reclaiming that protected time and trust, you are not just doing extra administrative work, you are taking back the intellectual autonomy and authority of your profession. That's it for this episode of DigiSET Talks. DigiSET is co-funded by the European Union under the Erasmus program. The views expressed are those of the speakers and do not necessarily reflect those of the European Union or the granting authority. Find this episode and the rest of the series on the DigiSET website. Thanks for listening.